alive and well. Evil is alive and well.
Standing at one of the most famous intersections in, I guess, anywhere in the world. This is the location right in front of me right here, where John F. Kennedy was shot and assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. As you can see, it's been turned into a shrine. There's a museum at Dealey Plaza, which is now Dallas County Administration Building. This truck is just coming along just around the same way that Kennedy came, except a little bit faster. Anyway, it didn't try to cover it up. I asked who's actually here, and it was the city of Dallas. One of the things that struck me as you look across the street at the grassy knoll, so it's not very grassy and it's not very knoll-like. The incline is kind of steep, but it's really a very small. Oh, by the way, here's another thing. Just in case we didn't have enough disaster on this corner. People like to stand in the middle of the street and take pictures. I prefer to take pictures from the sidewalk, but I'm coming up here in the grassy knoll, right around the spot where Kennedy was shot, which was right around here. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure, but it's possible that X marks the spot. It's very surrealistic. Time has stood still. You go inside the building and you come out here, and you've seen so many pictures and videos and so forth, and this is the actual spot. They mention the fact that people do not, 70% of Americans do not feel that it was a lone gunman. They list out, the various commissions, the Warren Commission, the Rockefeller Commission, and so forth. And then following after the Rockefeller Commission was another Senate Commission, which showed that there was cover-up by CIA and FBI and other entities, and it really does. It's not just a propaganda piece, so it is worth coming to. One of the most horrific incidents in the history of the world happened right here, and there's a woman with a cane standing in the middle of the street. I'm surprised that you don't have more death happening right here. Anyway.
After a deluded gunman assassinated President Kennedy,
the back of his head, part of it blew off, and it landed over there by the line post.
Oh my God.
They think there was 4 gunmen.
Well, I guess I will have to go talk to that gentleman, yeah.
Apparently he was 13 years old here that day.
Amazing.
There's a black guy in a black hood up there. He was 13, and he said he saw smoke come up from the trees here.
Uh-huh. Wow.
It's filmed at 18.3 frames per second. You gotta remember the Warren Commission said all the shots came from here, Singapore from the top corner window, and that one of those shots hit President Kennedy in the back of the head and killed him right where that X is, and threw him violently forward. Well, 11 and a half years later, Robert released the film, as I say, in less than 1/18 of a second after the headshot. Instead of being thrown forward, he slammed back into the left.
Huh.
He doesn't go forward until he bounces off the back seat. Then he comes forward. From that X, he's thrown towards that light post across the street, back into the left. Impossible with a shot from behind. The whole back of the president's skull, this big bump you can grab back here, that whole thing was blown out right where the X is, and it flew back into the left through the air, landing just to the left of the light post with the grass over it before Congress. So that was a good thing. They saw it and they voted to reopen the case with a congressional investigation that lasted 3 years. You got to remember the Warren Commission only lasted a couple of months and never hired a single investigator. This lasted 3 years, hired an army of investigators. And 3 years later, in 1978, Congress reversed the Warren Commission. They said it was a conspiracy, and they said at least one shot did come from behind the fence on top of the grassy knoll. That's where the federal government has stood on this now for 31 years. Robert Gruden, we had a lady earlier that complained about the autopsy pictures. She said, oh, those are just there for shock value. And we had to explain to her that the best visual evidence that the headshot came from the front, not the back. Here's the thing, if the shot had come from here, hitting the president in the back of his head, entrance wounds make little holes. Exit wounds make big holes. He never turned around, which means there ought to be a little hole back here. Instead, when you look at the autopsy pictures, what you see see is a massive exit wound in the back of the president's head. How could an exit wound get in the back of the president's head? Well, every doctor said the bullet
Wow.
went here and blew out the back and part of the top. Every doctor that saw him, all 22 doctors. The Warren Commission never even saw these pictures. That's why they're in the magazine. That's why they're important. Have a free look at the The documentary has all the films. You've seen this one that Robert released with Dick Gregory back in 1975. That's great. But guess how many people were filming out here? Out of the 400 plus witnesses that were here, everybody brought a camera of some kind. 122 were filming. They're all here, as well as 400 of the most important still photos, interviews with the doctors, etc. You cannot get this, you can't see this in America. They will not broadcast it for 30 more years. You got to go to Europe, Canada, anywhere else because of that executive order. It's actually been rated #1 in the world 3 years in a row as a documentary on the case, but you can't see it broadcast here.
Do you guys have a website?
I'm getting there. If you go to JFKmurder.com, you can get this though for $35. Here it's $25, and you get the $10 magazine with it for free. Okay? So have a free look. And before you leave, make sure you say hi to Mr. Mike Brownlow. How y'all doing? Mike was here that day. He was 13 years old, saw and heard the whole thing. His grandma and his aunt brought him out here so he could see his president. He saw him all right. He's one of the last people to see President Kennedy alive. He stood on the sidewalk out here. He's been in lots of books. His picture's actually in the magazine too, there in the crowd. He can tell you what he saw and heard. You'll be able to tell your great-great-grandkids 95 years from now, when you're his age, that you once talked to someone who was actually at the Kennedy assassination. That's pretty cool.
There was a gentleman here that day named Mr. Jim Alkins, and he took that photograph, that little boy there you see in the red shirt in that picture. At the age of 14, that's me.
Now watch the right side of your screen. The arrow points to one of 2 agents whose job was to hop aboard the bumper and act as human shields. He's obviously perplexed. Watch as he shrugs his shoulders 3 times in dismay, each shrug more dramatic than the last. Watch this scene for the final time and ask yourself, is this the kind of conduct you would expect from an agency that routinely sends an advance team to a city a month or more prior to the president's arrival in order to make preparations? Now ask yourself if the assassination could have taken place at all had those men been on the bumper during the motorcade. This is the rear of the presidential limousine. The back bumper is specially designed with a platform on both the right and left sides. There are also handrails on both sides of the trunk. This is where the agent should have been to provide the president even minimal security. The president, unaware of the treachery behind him and the danger waiting for him ahead, continued on to his death.
Our nation turned to Gerald Ford and a select handful of others to make sense of that madness. And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but the Warren Commission report will always have the final, definitive say on this tragic matter. Why? Because Jerry Ford put his name on it, and Jerry Ford's word was always good.
Government really hiding secrets about the JFK assassination. Gerald Ford was a member of the Warren Commission, and there are some explosive new details about that fateful day revealed in our next guest's book, Brian.
Yeah, the publisher of that book, Tim Miller of Flat Sign Press, has more on Ford's revelations, and of course, Ford wrote a lot before he left us. Tim, first things first, what's new?
Good morning, sir. The many things new, including the fact that this book, actually authored by Gerald Ford, finally proves once and for all that the CIA, our government, did destroy documents and cover up many facts that day in Dallas.
How do you know?
President Ford says it in writing in this book, released after his death. There are lots of things, including his comments on 9/11 and other historic events.
And it leads him to the conclusion there was a second shooter.